to have a few bumps in the road because we're just learning how this all works. And so be patient with us. But um, we're going to be looking for your impression of how this could work in the future. And we're not used to the abundance of facilities and technology, but we'll learn as we go and make use of it best we can. Um, we've been through quite an interesting year with the weather we've had to deal with. And so this is kind of our fall regrouping opportunities and a learning experience that I hope everybody fully partakes in. If you want to, please follow with me. I'm going to go through the items in your folders. Um, we have a technology that we can use. If you noticed when you came in or have been out in the lunch area, um, the commons is going to be where we're going to eat dinner and where refreshments will be available during breaks. And then our displays will be up and down the hallways, and our second meeting room, or that's going to be the classroom. It's 204, and it's marked down there on the hallway that you probably came in through. We've got a number of items here I want to go over. In your folders, you have a dark orange evaluation form. This form is one that we ask everyone to fill in and provide the information that we use for planning purposes. And we greatly appreciate your evaluating how much you learned in each session, because that's how we determine if those topics and those speakers are helpful to you in learning. And it's all about learning. You're not trying to rank speakers on popularity issues. You're ranking your own opportunity to learn. And indirectly, that would indicate how effective the speaker is in communicating their message. Um, we also need your input so that this form actually becomes your ticket for the door prizes end of the day. So um, trees help us get some information to help planning, and then you, in return for your efforts, um, qualify for the door prizes at the end of the afternoon. On the green sheet, we have our list of suppliers and exhibitors. And this is a pretty comprehensive list, and you can use this throughout the year if you want to follow up, find people that could be of help to you. And we're going to introduce them before lunch today so that you can get acquainted with them. And they enjoy talking with you, so don't be bashful. Stop and visit and get acquainted. This conference is also a joint effort, collaboration with our neighbors to the south, River Country RC&D, and we're working on this together. And with a new venue, we hope to attract some of the folks from our neighbors to the south. So I hope they're here, and thank you for being here. We also want to thank our hosts for our pasture walks this past year and all the organizations that we partner with throughout the year. The other items I think we'll mention at the break before lunch. And there are some interesting links there on that or on that green sheet that you could use afterwards. I think that's probably the highlights in that folder, and there's other information in there from speakers that we'll refer to when we get into the individual presentations. Are there any questions or any announcements that you want to make? Sometimes we encourage people to mention if they're looking for some item or they have something for sale. They want to find customers to market that to, or maybe even trade or swap. So if you're having something you'd like to make everybody aware of, this would be the time, or we'll look for other opportunities if we have time later today as well. So again, thanks for being here, and Otto is going to be our timekeeper and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Northwest Graziers has been in existence since 1991, and I came on board in 2004 in extension, and Lynn came about that time also, and we did have, I think, 2 or 3 conferences in here, you know, back around 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. We've been in this facility before. This is a wonderful place. It's almost too spacey. We need to attract another 1,000 people, maybe, you know. But there's a new relationship now, you know, between Northwest Graziers Extension and the campus, and one of the reasons we're here, other than, you know, to collaborate with River Country, is the fact that the price was right for this facility this year. So, so I'm gonna be your timekeeper, and I'm gonna be sitting back there somewhere, and I'm gonna hold up a 10 or a 5, you know, and make sure that you get off the podium when you're supposed to, and you know. So anyway. Our first speaker is, and I haven't met this fellow before, Jeff Hadachek, Associate Professor, UW-Madison, and he's going to talk about the economics of conservation practices. Welcome.
Thanks, Otto. Yes, let me get the. All right, good morning, everyone. And it's good to be here. My name is Jeff Hadachek, and I'm actually an assistant professor. The program's an associate. It probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it is actually a big thing in my world. But I have been with UW from since about August of last year. I am originally from Kansas, the north central part of the state, in that red county that's circled up there, Republic County. I grew up on a corn, soy, and wheat farm, and until about a month ago, we also were a cow-calf operation. We sold most of our heifers about a year ago, and then a month ago, we sold the rest of our cows. So my dad is like 73 now, and so last winter was really hard in terms of getting out into the pasture, and it's also really hard for me to do chores from Wisconsin. And so we made the hard decision to sort of exit the cattle business, but we still are growing the corn, soy, and wheat. I did my undergraduate degree at Kansas State University in agricultural economics, and I worked in industry for a couple of years and decided that I wanted to go into more research. And so I went to UC Davis in California for my PhD. I met my wife there, and she is originally from California, and I convinced her to move to Wisconsin and to enjoy the winters here. But we've really enjoyed it so far. I still am a big Kansas State Wildcat fan, but also I'm a Badger now. They both play later today, so I should have time to see them. But I took this picture a month ago when I was home visiting my parents, and this was the first time that I had seen this on the landscape, but it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, so I apologize for that. But something really interesting has happened in my hometown, and that is that about 250 wind turbines have been constructed in the last year. And so the landscape looks a lot different, especially at night. You can see a few more just in the back. But I included this picture as sort of a motivating, it's a big motivation for me around this topic, but it's an example that there is increasing demands for the use of our agricultural lands, and not farming the way it was 20 years ago. It's not just about how much can we produce on our lands, but there is also demand for either urban pressures or for renewable energy purposes, and it's mostly solar here in Wisconsin. But then additionally, we also have additional pressures and sort of eyes looking at us as to how we manage our soil and how we contribute to sort of water quality more broadly in our states. And so as an economist, and this is where I get really excited, is that this is a tension, right? There are, we as landowners who have these turbines on our property greatly benefit from this, but at the same time, there is understandable sort of community resistance against this, right? And so there are certainly positives and certainly negatives that must be weighed, I think, in terms of when we have conversations about how we use our lands, right? And so today I'm going to sort of proceed in three topics, and I really come from primarily my experience and research focuses on row crops, but I think there's a lot that can be sort of taken from row crops generally and sort of this conversation generally about ecosystem services and have broader implications for graziers and beef operations as well here in Wisconsin. And so first, I'm going to talk about my take and my perspective on why ecosystem services matter. And generally, from a policy perspective, what we are considering when we talk about ecosystem services and measuring ecosystem services. Second, I'm going to talk about barriers and strategies to create landscape level change. And so we know that there are some practices that we can implement on our farms that can generate ecosystem services. But at the same time, there are certainly economic, social barriers that exist in terms of scaling these up more broadly. But also then from a strategy perspective, I'm going to talk about why I think conferences like this and why networks like grazing networks and our producer-led watershed groups throughout the state are also important levers for creating some of these changes. And then lastly, I'll just have a few points touching and connecting these larger thoughts to grazing. So, you know, what I want to provide, I think, today is sort of motivation and a really high level picture, economic perspective on these topics. And so as you continue to have conversations today about nutrient management plans and about practices that we can implement on our landscape, this is really hopefully a reason why we care about those things and why I think that those things are important. So starting off really big picture, my colleague Steve Deller does these contribution of agriculture to the Wisconsin economy and essentially measures how much does agriculture contribute to our state's economy. And this was done in 2017, but the number was essentially 104 billion at that point. And 16% of the state's sort of GDP comes from agriculture in some extent. Something like 1 in 9 individuals who live in Wisconsin or who work in Wisconsin are employed by the agricultural industry. Beef production makes about 3.3 billion of that, and dairy makes up obviously a large portion of that at 45 billion. So that is to say that agriculture is a pillar of our state's economy. I don't need to convince you all of that. I think you know that. We are actually, I've been working with Steve on updating these numbers. And so in a couple of weeks, we'll have new numbers. And guess what? This $104 billion is increasing. It's something like 116 billion now for this current number. So agriculture is a big part of our economy, and we know that, and our state values that, our state legislature values that. But at the same time, our natural amenities that we have in Wisconsin are a big part of our culture and a big part of our economy as well. So the outdoor recreation industry is a $10 billion industry in Wisconsin. Tourism generates about $25 billion annually for our the state. Fishing also generates $2.33 billion annually. And lastly, you know, that doesn't touch on sort of the more intrinsic and harder things to value of like, what's the value of our drinking water? And about 30% of Wisconsin residents drink water from unmonitored and unregulated wells, meaning that as that pollution enters our water systems, these individuals, about 30% of our residents, may be consuming sort of unsafe to drink water, right? So I provide these things, and this is a picture of me enjoying Wisconsin's natural amenities in my first year living here, but I include these things because on one hand, we have agriculture, which obviously provides huge benefits to our state's economy. But on the other hand, we have to be cognizant and realistic that the things that we do, this economic activity that we do generate, also has potential negative consequences for other industries in the state, and measurable ones at that, right? So if we're taking away from sort of the outdoor recreation industry and tourism industry, those costs can sort of be added up, right? And so this is why, from sort of a big picture perspective, why we want to sort of have a more holistic picture of how the practices that we're rolling out on our land are not causing undue damage to society and these other industries more broadly. An example of this, and I have some work that's evaluating essentially the occurrences of harmful algal blooms using satellite data from space. And 5 years ago, if you would have told me that I would have been doing that, I would have said, that's you're full of it. This is Star Wars level stuff that we're talking about here. But essentially, we have satellites that are rotating around our Earth and taking pictures of the landscape all the time. And we use those products to generate some things like land cover. The cropland data layer, if you've heard of that, basically predicts what is being grown in a given field in a given time. We can also use those same images to generate essentially predictions and track harmful algal blooms in water resources in our state. And so this is Lake Wissota. Just an example, this picture was taken on August 11th. And you can see the red bands here that you see of pictures are the areas that it's pretty harmful to be actually swimming in those areas. And so the blue-green are less harmful, but it's when you, over time, that could turn into red. And so essentially, this gives us images into how our state's natural resources are changing and how we can track then how conservation practices around Lake Wissota affect the occurrence of harmful algal blooms. That's one thing that we can do with this. And so similarly here, this is then now about 5 weeks later on September 29th, we can see that there's the rest of Lake Wissota has sort of entered this maybe sort of dangerous category or warning category. And so we can use these temporal measures and these images over time to say, our lake's water resources are degrading by X%, right? Similarly, we can also use data on how our drinking water quality is in our state. And this challenge, I think, probably enters most corners of the state, and including here in Northwest Wisconsin. There's a lot of wells that are exceeding or getting near to that 10 parts per million or 10 milligrams per liter threshold that's considered dangerous by the EPA. We also have many other wells and drinking water systems that are increasing over time, that if they're not there yet, they may be there in the future, right? And so all of these things we can take the harmful algal blooms, we can take our estimates of the number of wells that have potentially harmful impacts, and we can assign dollar values to them. And so this is where I wear sort of two hats in my work. One is as an environmental economist that tries to value environmental resources. And then the other hat is an agricultural economist that sort of ties these two things together. And so there's been an extensive amount of work that has been done estimating essentially what is a visit to a lake worth to an individual. And taking all of those studies into account, it amounts to about $70. So essentially what these studies do is that they go and ask, if I gave you $50, would you not go to the lake today? If you go to the lake today and forego that $50, then that visit to the lake is worth more than $50 to you. And so essentially where that work has landed on is that on average, each person per day's visit to the lake is about worth about $70. And so we can take those harmful algal blooms, and if there is a sort of a lake closure or a beach closure on any given day, we can count up the number of recreational visits that would be foregone because of that harmful algal bloom and assign that $70 value to them. Secondly, these harmful algal blooms also have important consequences for lakefront property owners. Not all of us are lakefront property owners, so maybe this doesn't matter that much to us, but for a 10% increase in harmful algal blooms on a given lake, there's been research to show that that has declined property values by about 3.5%. Again, maybe this isn't stuff, these aren't costs that we as farmers are internalizing, but society and someone else is internalizing these costs, right? Third is if we think about what are the costs of avoiding nitrate contaminated drinking water, to install a reverse osmosis in our home, this may cost somewhere between $250 and $1,400, depending on the system that we're instituting. And then lastly, from a nitrogen fertilizer perspective, there's about, there can be a dollar value assigned to about 32 cents per pound of nitrogen that's applied. That's a pretty large number relative to the actual costs that farmers are paying for nitrogen, right? So I don't, you know, these are arguable numbers, and research could show different numbers, but just to say that we can put dollar values on a lot of these things and on each of our practices. I also want to say that feel free to interrupt me at any time. If you have a question, raise your hand. I know that we're not going to, may not have a ton of time at the end, but yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, you certainly could. If you follow up with me after, it'll probably be easier to send this. There's a project that's called, I think it's Cyan. I don't know if it's on this. It's on the DNR site. Okay, great. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this is a project that's partnered with the EPA, but it's cyanograph or something like that. But and then the drinking water piece is from Kevin Masarek's group at UW Stevens Point, the Center for Watershed Science. That's what that. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. But if you follow with me afterwards, I'd be happy to send you about the harmful algal. All right, well, I'll continue moving on. And so what I want to get to, and what I put these costs up here not to be like, not to point fingers at agriculture, and not to say that like these are exorbitant damages that we need to solve, but to say that we can also have a part in improving some of these things. If we're reversing some of the trends that we see from soil loss and from harmful algal blooms, those are ecosystem service benefits that we can be generated on farm. An example of this is just looking at erosion rates across the state. So this is from the natural resource inventory done by the NRCS every year, and these are particularly for Barron County, where we're at today. And so cultivated land in the county averages somewhere around 4 tons per acre per year of soil loss. Uncultivated area is about 2 tons per acre per year, and pasture land is less than 1. It's something like maybe 0.2 tons per acre per year, right? So the practices that we institute on our lands can certainly have an impact on the soil that ends up in our water systems, and soil that is taken away from our fields, right? Similarly, I just compared this to Barron County to the national average. So Barron County falls a little bit below the Wisconsin average, but this corner of the state in particular has more erodible soil than the rest of the state, and the rest of the nation typically, right? So the practices that we do institute in sort of highly erodible soils can reverse some of these trends and can provide sort of ecosystem services. And what I mean by this is that there was a study done by David Pimental in 1995 that was sort of the first seminal study to sort of quantify how much is a ton of soil worth to our farmers, both on farm and off farm. And so at the time when they were doing this, the national average soil erosion rate was something like 6 tons per acre per year. They estimated that resulted in about $79 or $80 of cost per acre per year, and a cost per ton basis that was about $11.50 cost per ton, right? So we can then take the erosion rate that we have for Barron County today and sort of trace back those numbers. And so using sort of the same cost per ton basis, we can find out that on average, our acres are losing about $46 per ton per year um, based on that average rate in Barron County. However, we want to adjust this for inflation, and then from those 1995 values, and that's actually something about $100 per acre per year in loss benefits of soil erosion. Yeah. Yeah. Then the next layer. Yeah. Right. No, so there, I don't think it was. I think this is generally considered lost topsoil that is something. And why I think this is interesting, and to sort of further to illustrate this point, where I grew up in Kansas was sort of the heart of the Dust Bowl. And there was a study, and this really was what sort of launched me in this path on agricultural economics and sort of measuring these things, is that this study found and went back and looked and traced agricultural revenues at the county level since the Dust Bowl, so since the 1930s when the Dust Bowl initially happened. And they found that still today, agricultural revenues are 30% lower in the most highly eroded counties than they were in the lowest eroded county, right? So those impacts are persisting for decades. And it could be a reason why my farm, my family's farm, was not making much money for, oh, we'll use that as an excuse anyway, for the last couple of decades. And so these things we can measure and have dollar values, not only to our farms, but also off farms as well, right? So of this $104, about 77 of that is on-farm benefits or on-farm losses, whichever way you look at it, and $26 of that is off-site to our water systems and yeah. Right.
If you were to go buy
Yeah.
they cost many, many times
More than that. Yeah.
So it's depending on a perspective.
Yeah.
Value and
Right. Yeah.
this is more like
Yeah. Future profits and future revenue. Yeah. 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 That's a good point. Yeah. The replacement value would probably be much more than that for 4 tons of. Yeah.
big.
Yeah. And so therein sort of lies the argument for both on-farm and off-farm soil conservation. However, when we talk about practices, and this is again particularly to row crops and in the U.S., the practices that we have at our disposal, whether it's no-till or cover crops, are sort of the two primary ones that we talk about oftentimes. These practices and instituting them do have trade-offs, and that they're costly to do so. And so there was this study done looking at sort of across the Midwest, across the Corn Belt, when cover crops were adopted, what was the subsequent yield effects of that? And what they found is that in corn, the average yield drag in that year after first implementing cover crops was something around 5% lower. So for 180 for corn that's yielding 180 bushels, that's something almost like 10 bushels per acre loss, a little bit less than 10 bushels per acre loss. And so not only do you have to consider, if you're a row crop farmer, not only do you have to consider the cost of implementing cover crops and the labor costs to go out into the field, but you also have to consider then what is it going to do to my following cash crop? And $10, maybe whenever corn is $4 a bushel, it's not that big of a deal. But when it is $5 and $6 per bushel, this 5% can sort of make or break profit margins. And so I did sort of back of the envelope calculations, and this is, using sort of a partial budget approach, is if we're implementing hairy vetch or implementing cereal rye, which are two common cover crops that are used, what's the sort of yield benefit that you would need in order for that practice, implementing that practice, to break even in that following year, right? So based on sort of the cost data that we have, based on 410 price for corn, what essentially, without cost sharing, you need a 4.3 bushel increase in corn to offset the cost of implementing cover crops. If you're leveraging cost share, that actually reverses, and you can allow a little bit for that yield drag of 4% or so. And depending on where you're getting your cost share from, it will vary that calculus a little bit. But that is to say that typically what an economist will do is we'll take sort of the cost of doing something and compare it to the benefits in a sort of single snapshot basis. And that to say is that implementing these cover crops, implementing conservation is certainly costly, right? So while there are soil erosion benefits of doing so, we don't fully recover the investment cost of doing so in that first year, right? And so, oh, my arrow didn't move over. So one thing though that I've been working on, and I think looking back at this approach, is that it sort of doesn't take in the full picture to account, right? So we look at this, and this is just the following year of implementing these practices. And so it ignores the long run benefits. So if our soil health is increasing over time, and we expect the returns to not actually come until 10, 15 years down the road from these practices, this approach won't tell us what those benefits are 10, 15 years down the road. Second is if these practices not only affect our bottom lines in that given year, but they also reduce the riskiness of our operations, we ignore sort of the risk management benefits of doing so. And so there's been some research that implementing cover crops reduces crop insurance indemnities the following year by about 12%. So it really is cutting off sort of that downside risk, not completely cutting it off, but lowering relative to areas that didn't adopt cover crops. And so again, in this approach, that risk management effects are sort of ignored. And then lastly is, we think as like extension economists, we come out here into the community, and oftentimes we'll show something like this, assuming that we know that the exact values are right. And when we put up a single number on what's the profit and loss from something, it assumes that there's sort of an exact number that we know. We do not know. There's oftentimes large variance and large uncertainty into what actually will happen. And so this sort of partial budget approach that we typically have for operations from an economist perspective, really, I don't think tell all of the pictures of some of these practices that we have on our landscape. And so what I've developed, and I've been working on this recently, so this is still sort of in testing and operation, is that rather than having just a sort of a spreadsheet approach where we're getting our single dollar amounts, is that I've created a decision tool that is a web application that allow you to go in and move the sliders, move your input costs, move your initial amounts, and essentially, rather than landing on a single number, we're going to give you over 1,000 scenarios. Essentially, is what we're going to simulate 1,000 times, is 1,000 years worth of data. How many times is that outcome going to give you a profit that's greater than zero here? So the green here is our soil health system, and then the yellow is our conventional system. And how you should read this is that you should think about this yellow curve are all of the possible outcomes based on, sort of weather variability, agronomic uncertainty. You get these wider distributions, wider outcomes of possibilities. But with our soil health system and using some of those assumptions that we know from the research on how soil health impacts our systems in terms of a risk management perspective, it shrinks that distribution. And so we have far fewer outcomes that end up being here in this negative area, negative category, zero net returns. And so you get sort of a shrinking towards the middle. So there's more certainty around what those are. And so this tool is really just an opportunity to be able to visualize that. And rather than saying, here's what you can expect from a sort of a spreadsheet or a partial budget approach, you get sort of the distribution of outcomes that are available to you. And then you as a producer can make the decision whether or not you think it's worth taking that risk. And similarly, just visualize in a different way, is that in this setup and with those inputs, 69.5% of the time, our soil health system is breaking even, whereas 64% of the time, 63.6% of the time, our conventional system is breaking even, right? So even though you may be taking on those additional costs by implementing cover crops and no-till, you have greater certainty around whether or not you're just going to break even in a given year. So that's something I've been developing for row crop operations. Certainly, I think there's going to be different implications for graziers. But I think more generally, I want to think about and create resources that provide more of a holistic perspective rather than just sort of a one-shot approach where it sort of assumes that we think we know what the outcome will be. So then next, I'm going to sort of move to this scaling up conservation. I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about initiatives that we have in our state and in our nation around implementing these practices on farm. And so the traditional one is NRCS and local conservation cost share programs through EQIP, CSP, and CRP. Second, there's been like $3.1 billion nationwide invested into these climate smart initiatives. Some of you may be a part of those that are essentially additional cost share funding through different programs. Third, voluntary carbon markets. Again, I'm assuming that a lot of you have probably been approached by the likes of Indigo Ag or Bayer to sort of pay you for storing carbon in the soils. And then lastly, these sort of local programs that we have in Wisconsin, the Producer-Led Watershed Program, the Nitrogen Optimization Pilot Program. Practical Farmers of Iowa, even though they have Iowa in their name, they do apply for Wisconsin farmers as well. So a lot of these cost share initiatives are in place, and there's a lot of momentum, probably more momentum than there ever has been in the history of the US in terms of funding and scaling up these conservation efforts on our land. And just briefly, I include what you could receive from a cost share program from NRCS. These are typically paying the most out of all of those options. The voluntary carbon markets, I think, are paying still a pretty low rate, which is why there's been pretty low uptake in those markets. And just across the state, growers in the Northwest here are leveraging NRCS funding at a pretty high rate. The only counties that are higher are sort of over in the Green Bay area. And so that is to say, I think farmers here are leveraging those resources. And with sort of this additional funding that's come through the Inflation Reduction Act, there's more opportunity now than ever to use some of those resources. And largely what's the funding is going to from these NRCS practices, 40% of that funding in Wisconsin goes to cover crops. Some goes to fence, brush management, prescribed grazing, but that's a pretty small percentage relative to cover crops. And so that is just to say that those resources are available if you want to leverage sort of prescribed grazing and using fence and needing to purchase fence. These resources are available for you to institute new grazing practices. However, and this has been true for a lot of years, is that EQIP, the federal budget limits on EQIP largely never meet the demands for it. And so something like 70% of contracts in recent years actually go unfunded because there's just not enough funding across the landscape to do these things, to provide farmers with this funding. And so I mentioned most of this already, but there has been a lot of federal policy that's provided additional funding for these resources. And so I think there's a lot of just focus right now on scaling these things up. But we've largely just focused from a federal perspective on throwing more money at these programs. And all of this is sort of in flux with a sort of an impending farm bill and farm bill extension that's likely to happen going into the next fiscal year for the federal government. And so depending on what happens next Tuesday, we can either maybe continue to see additional efforts in conservation moving forward, depending on which party controls the legislature, versus part of scaling back and more funding relative into traditional farm programs. There's been some research also done sort of highlighting sort of the uncertainty around what the benefits of these practices. And so this is just, I brought this up just to show that when we're sort of thinking about carbon sequestration, and this goes back to our voluntary carbon markets, there's pretty wide uncertainty into how much we're actually sequestering into our soils. So something for conservation tillage, something between 0.06 tons per hectare per year and a half a ton per hectare per year. And then again, on the crop productivity side of things from implementing these practices, pretty wide range and wide error bars. So that is to say that like we should not think about one single number when we are looking at these benefits and looking at what the actual impacts on our farm of these practices may be. So that being said, I think I have, I mentioned that there's a lot of funding being thrown at this from the federal government, but I have, because of things like this, I have skepticism that actually these programs are accomplishing what they say they're accomplishing. We're throwing a lot of funding at these programs, but if we're not actually sequestering carbon like the goal is, then maybe we're throwing a lot of money away that is not necessarily achieving the goals of the program. And so that to say, I think there's a lot of social elements of how farmers adopt practices and how we should be thinking about how we scale up conservation more broadly on the landscape. And so this study was done by some of my colleagues at Iowa State. They essentially did a survey of like 380 farmers in Wisconsin. 37% of them got a video from a farmer that described why they adopted a certain conservation benefit. 41% of them sort of randomly got this video from an Iowa State extension professional. So you can think of someone like me, got onto this video and explained sort of the science and agronomic and potentially economic benefits of implementing some of these practices. And then the other 22% were sort of the control group. They received no video at all, but they still took the survey. And what they found was that farmers that received the video from one of their fellow farmers were 21% more likely to increase the likelihood of adoption of a conservation practice. And the video from the extension professional only yielded an 8% increase in likelihood. So that to say is that farmers have the better power to sort of influence your neighbors, right? More so than we do. I don't know if that means that our jobs are sort of obsolete or becoming more obsolete as extension professionals, but you all have more insight and an ability to influence your neighbors than somebody from UW-Madison to come down and talk to you about the science of why they should implement these practices should. So hopefully that's a motivating factor that if you all are here as sort of early adopters of these practices, that there's somebody in mind that you can think about who maybe has a little bit more social barriers to implementing these practices. And then related to this is, sorry, was there a question? Okay, well, feel free, yeah. If you can do the work for us, then that's great. Yeah. Unrelated, but does anybody know the Peterson Farm Bros? They do like parody videos. Very similar story. I played basketball against this kid, like one of them in high school, because they're from Kansas. And one day, like overnight they had like 7 million views on their videos. And so people are interested in what's happening on farms, but it often takes farmers to tell their story to do it, right? And very similarly, I have been working with DATCAP to evaluate the Wisconsin producer-led watershed program. And the basis of these programs is very similar to, this survey is founded in this study, is that if producers can take matters into their own hands, if they can control sort of what efforts happen within their watershed, they can invite their neighbors to participate in these conversations and these practices. They can have more of an influence than if it's just sort of an NRCS professional that has funding available broadly to people. And so what I have found, I've been working with them now for the last year or so. I've gone across the state and assembled data from our producer-led groups, using also satellite data on land use and cropping decisions. I've compared sort of the groups that adopted producer-led watershed programs relative to neighboring watersheds that didn't adopt those programs. And what I found is that has led to increased conservation and diversified cropping practices broadly across the state and in these watersheds. And so that's something like a 17% increase in cover crop adoption in these producer-led groups relative to their watersheds that did not adopt. There's like a 15% increase in small grain growing. So that's wheat, corn, barley, rye. And so our rotations are getting more diverse in these producer-led groups. And this is sort of stated interest within a lot of the groups, is that they have subsidies or they have cost share programs for growing wheat or barley or oats for the first time. And then conservation adoption is something lower, increased about like the conservation tillage adoption increases about 8%, but considering those are probably more widely practiced anyway, that's not that surprising to see that it was only a small increase. And then again, there's also this measure of living root, which is essentially how perennial our plants are, how perennial are our fields in terms of having living root in there year round. And so there's a small percentage increase in there as well. So that is to say that it seems like, when it comes to sort of the economics of what drives decisions, certainly profit in the short and long run are important, and farmers will make decisions based on what's profitable in the short or long run. But there are also other factors that drive decisions, including risk. And I talked about knowing and having tools available to us to assess the riskiness and how does the soil health impact the riskiness of our farms. Knowledge barriers, traditions, and those are things that we as farmers can help sort of break down with our neighboring farmers, right? So lastly, we'll touch on just a few things. Some colleagues of mine did a survey of, stop or 10 minutes? 10 minutes, okay. Recently my colleagues in the Ag and Applied Econ department did a survey of grazers in the state. These were primarily dairy grazing farms, but I just wanted to share some data with you from this survey. Largely what we saw is that grazers were or smaller operations, which is probably not surprising. So they had 272 cows relative to 265 cows on larger operations. Predominantly organic farms were our grazing relative to the non-grazers. And then what I'll draw attention to down here is that it's interesting to me that though grazing is adopted and though like focusing on grazing operations, we see less percent adoption of nutrient management plans. Now, my hypothesis is that these non-grazing operations are probably required to have a nutrient management plan according to regulations, and so that's why they are increasing at a higher rate. But I think there's a lesson here that there's still room for us, for the grazers in the room to sort of think about these practices more broadly. And even though while we see grazing being implemented, conservation rates are either lower or similar to their non-grazing counterparts. Yes. Yep. Yep. Thank you, Lynn. And I think it's led by Michael, who's in the back of the room. And then I was going to pull this from Grasslands 2.0. They have a fact sheet on this, so maybe you all have seen this before. But just going back to our soil erosion measure and our soil erosion conversation earlier, is that if we're looking at sort of what, how many pounds of soil we're losing in our corn and soy rotations, tilled and no cover crop versus corn and soy, tilled and cover crop. Even though I spent a lot of time talking about tillage and cover cropping today, pasture and managed grazing is really sort of the gold standard when it comes to ecosystem services on our landscape. And so everything that I talked about from a cover crop and no-till perspective, it's amplified even further based on pasture and managed grazing systems. And then lastly, I'll just say this, because I do work in a row crop operation a lot, I focus a lot on sort of like net profitability in these operations and net returns. And so if we plot sort of the net returns, the estimated net returns from USDA from the past 20 years, there has been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years that corn has been had a net value of production above zero. And those 3 years were from essentially the boom after the renewable fuel standard in 2010, 2011, 2012. And then in the last couple of years when corn prices were higher again. But if we extended this further to today, I am almost certain that net value of production is going to be less than zero again for corn this year. And so I think what I want to say about this is that when those spikes in net profitability happened, we saw a lot of acres in Wisconsin converted to corn production. And you know, it's not at the cost of just soybean production, so it wasn't a corn and soy rotation moving to just continuous corn, but those acres are coming from elsewhere, right? And oftentimes I think it's coming from marginal land that wouldn't typically be farmed for row crops, which often means it's our pasture land that is brought into production. And so we saw those spikes of about 500,000 acres in 2011, 2012, and we saw it again recently when prices were high, right? So I illustrate this because I think there's, again, probably a lot of pressures to, when prices are high, and at least considerations to convert sort of our pasture and grazed land back to corn and soy rotations or back to corn based on what the price dictates. But I guess just be wary of that, because then there are, you know, a decade of years where you're probably earning negative values after that. So if we see these big flux in prices, it probably means they're going to come back down at a certain point. And so going back to sort of the soil conservation efforts and soil erosion efforts, when we sort of till up that, when we take our pasture land and we till it up for corn production or soy production, that's when most of that erosion can happen, right? So we have our soil carbon stored in there. We have our nutrients stored in there for the years of managed grazing. We till that up, we sort of we lose a lot of that. We lose a lot of the nutrients and the work we've done to build our soil health over the years. And so just when prices are high, think about the longer term. I know that there's going to be there would be pressure and considerations to sort of convert those marginal lands into row crop production, but from an ecosystem services perspective, we lose a lot of the work that we've done to build that up over the years from doing that. And so just to wrap up, you know, I think what I emphasize at the beginning is that there are sort of measurable ecosystem service benefits that we, folks like me, are trying to measure on the landscape level, whether that's from reducing harmful algal blooms or improving our state's water quality. And there's dollar values that we can attach to those measures, right? But we also, yeah. corn prices go up there. Right. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Yeah, there's belief that, the renewable fuel standard is primarily for an environmental benefit, but I think there's been research by other colleagues at UW who have showed that, um, yeah, yeah, certainly there's costs that yeah, 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 I'm 100% with you. I think some of those unintended consequences weren't considered, when yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'm with you, and which is why I offer this sort of cautionary tale is that, there may be booms, but there's also busts that follow behind that, and so yeah, 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 agree. Um, yeah, so I just wrap up. I think, there are certain barriers that exist that I'm sympathetic towards, and I know that, it's really costly to consider some of these things from a landscape level. There's a lot of momentum in this area right now, and probably um, more so than there ever will be, depending on how the political scene shapes up. But ultimately, whether or not there's federal support and state support for these practices, I think we as farmers have sort of the most power to influence our neighbors and to influence some of these adoption rates on land. So this is again why I think what the conversations that we're going to have today around nutrient management and around some of these things are really important from an education and networking perspective. And then lastly, I did focus a lot of time on the sort of cover crops and no-till from a row crop perspective, but what I have said about those practices, grazing is even further an example of sort of the gold standard of ecosystem services. But at the same time, the barriers to starting that, may be even more extreme because of equipment and other barriers. So yeah, I thank you for your time today, and I don't know if I have any time left for questions, but would be happy to chat after. So yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. So like measuring organic material in the soil. Yeah. It's, I think there is energy and efforts to try to do that. It becomes harder though, because what essentially is happening is it's looking at color spectrums to measure to measure the algal blooms in Lake Wissota. So if it's more green, it can measure essentially, we can have confidence about whether an algal bloom exists there or not. In soil, since soil is going to be rather opaque, it's going to be hard to actually measure that over time. We can measure some practices in a soil perspective, but oftentimes getting actual measurements of what is soil nutrients at any given time, whether it's organic matter, carbon. I don't think our technology is quite there yet. Maybe from if a drone, like if you have drone material, you're closer to the ground, you can maybe make better assessments of this. But since this is from satellites that are, miles off the ground, it's harder to actually to do from that level. So.
Second thing is that your last point on how do we get compensated for for those services we do provide. And who's lobbying on our behalf? How many millions and billions of dollars do the corn and soybean lobbyists put on decision makers? And how many do Graziers put on?
Yeah, probably far less. Yeah.
I see a graph of those two.
Yeah,
pairs.
that's a good point. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, of course. I don't know who was all first year. Yeah. Yeah. Continuing to. Yeah, that's a really good question, and like something we're trying to tease out right now, because one thing that we see is that conservation practices continue to increase, but because the state budget is fixed, or it has been fixed for the producer-led program, we actually see practices or dollar amounts decreasing. So what we see in that initial like turning on of a producer-led group, I think is driving a lot of the effect, and the dollar amounts are really pretty small, just a small piece of that to allow that to happen. We did compare it to like what's the effect of EQIP on conservation adoption relative to the dollar amount we're spending on producer-led, and it's something like 4 times more effective than EQIP funding. So for every dollar you spend into the producer-led program, you're getting 4 times as many benefits out of it. So that's the initial piece of that, but I think, yeah, from a continuation perspective, that's an interesting. Yeah. Thanks for that comment. I don't know if we have much time, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really fair point, and I was having a conversation with some folks earlier that like it does take a leader to make this happen, and oftentimes the leader is either land and conservation, is extension, to come in and organize that. And so I think there are some better examples, sort of in the southern half of the state. I'm thinking of a few places that I've been to, that Dodge County, Jefferson County, particular, that are truly farmer led. Like it's farmers that are the ones that are making the decisions. And it is, I think, with actually sort of modeling the idea, is it's less bureaucracy because it's farmers who are the ones that are, but yeah.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Jeff. Let's have a hand. I'm going to mention that before I retired from Extension, we did a survey of Graziers, Northwest Graziers, about 10 years ago. And in terms of learning, pasture walks were number one in the opinion of our responders, and conferences too. And then, somewhere after that, we had, farm visits and literature and telephone calls, that sort of thing. But pasture walks, farmer to farmer, was very important to our grazing network. Okay, our next speaker is Bill Halfman, and he's going to recoup the reputation of Extension with his talk. So go for it, Bill.
Yeah, we'll get this loaded up and get started here in a second. You can hit repair now. Zip through. Oh, nothing was wrong. Because we have an audience, it's going to be ornery. So, as Otto introduced me, I can tell you a little bit about myself. I was here last year, so if you were here last year or when we were up in Shell Lake, you maybe remember me, but it's been a year, right? So I'm the beef outreach specialist for the state with Extension. I actually lived down by Bloomer, where I grew up on a dairy farm. Spent most of the 90s in Tennessee, graduate school working with, and in Extension there, working in the forage program. Spent some time in southern Minnesota, and then roughly the last 20 years in Extension in Monroe County, down by Toma. Yeah, go into the slide up, the 20, that one. Yep. And facilities. And now I'm in this current position. There, so now we'll get started. Lynn, Lynn got a hold of me and asked me to talk about handling facilities and stockmanship. And this is a presentation that I've updated some, but the original one was put together by Amanda Kaufman, who was one of my coworkers down in Grant County for a handful of years, and she's got a new title called Farmer Mom now. But I want to acknowledge her contributions to this. And I think, if we think about this, why do we want to have a workable handling facility? I think a big part of it is safety, both for the people and also for the cattle. We just, talked about how valuable cattle are right now because numbers are down, and they can go from being valuable to not so valuable when they break a leg, right? So we don't want to have broken legs and other injuries that are going to cost us money. And the other thing too is being in Extension for close to 30 years now, I get the chance to interact with a lot of people, see a lot of things, visit with veterinarians. They talk to me maybe a little bit different than they talk to some of their customers. And they will share with me that, not all of them, but some of them will share with me, if I go to a farm that's got a pretty decent facility and we can scoot the cattle right through there with not a lot of problems and not a lot of risk of me getting a mud hole stomped in me, they get a much more attractive rate or bill than the ones where it's high risk and a lot of problems and I'm wasting a lot of time. So that's another thing to think about. And hopefully you don't need to vet out there too often, but maybe once in a while you do. But before we get into wood, and metal, and layouts, stockmanship is important. And the human factor, and what that is that's the human factor. And that is also a very important part of making facilities work, okay? We can set up a pretty good, very efficient mechanical layout and have a bunch of folks that don't have cow skills try to work cattle through there, and it would be still troublesome. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Where if we have a really good crew of people with good stockmanship and not terrible facilities, but reasonably decent facilities, they'll be able to make it work. Most of the time, they're going to say, we're going to change some things here before we go much farther, because they know we can move things around and make it better. Handler conduct also influences cattle temperament. You know, I go to farms, lots of them. You go to some places and you go out there and the cattle, they kind of recognize that you're there, but they don't get too excited about things. You go to other places and the cattle see the people and their ears are up and they're headed to the back corner of the pasture. Well, why is that? Temperament is moderately heritable. What that means, you know, yeah, some of it they get from their genetics, but there's also a pretty big influence on their environment and the stress that gets put on them by the humans or whatever else is going on. When I started in extension down in Tennessee, one of the places I went fairly early on, and this was a farm, and they were working getting them on a herd improvement program. So we were out there weighing calves and doing some vaccinations, and they were getting ready to sell the feeder calves at a feeder calf sale coming up pretty soon. And there was all kinds of commotion in the back where the hired people were trying to get the cattle to go down through the alleyway. It wasn't the best set up alleyway to begin with, but the ag agent made the comment to me, those guys back there are tractor drivers. And I didn't know what that meant because, you know, okay, well, what does that mean? They don't have cowboy skills. They're better off if we send them out to drive tractors somewhere. Okay. So if you think about that, think about your own crew when you're working cattle, your own family, the neighbors, whoever. Do they have decent cattle skills? Are they quiet and calm and just kind of work things through, or are they yelling and screaming and throwing their arms in the air? Maybe those that are not good and get the cattle riled up when they're around, maybe you need some pasture bush hogged or some other job, and they can go do that. You know, think about that as one way to look at it. So those are some things to keep in mind. We think about cattle, you know, they love routine, right? And I can't fault them too bad for that. I kind of like some routine as well. And they like to remain, you know, they like to stick together. They want to be with their other cattle. So peeling one off, we're going to have our hands full. If we need to get that one down because it's not feeling well and we want to check it out closer, it's going to be a lot easier to take a couple with it just for company. Think those like that. And they're also prey animals. And yes, they're big and they can hurt us, but in the grand scheme of things, they're food for other things. And so they're typically going to be looking around, and in some instances, they're going to see us as predators. If we step back and look at that a little more on cattle behavior, they want to see you. They want to know where you're at. They're typically going to want to go around you. Now, this is regular beef cattle. Bottle calves, dairy cows, they look at us, I think, sometimes as one of them or vice versa. You know, and they don't have the flight zone and things like that like a normal beef animal would have. Again, as mentioned earlier, they do want to be with other cattle. And typically, most of the time, cattle are going to want to go back to where the last place is that they were comfortable. I think that ties into that routine thing. The other thing we got to remember is they can only think about one thing at a time. And so that means if we've got distractions and other things going on, we can do things to eliminate those distractions, that's going to help them keep focused on what we want them to do. We look at their vision a little bit. And again, I think some of you know this. Hopefully it's a good review. Maybe you pick up a few things today. They can, their eyes are placed on the side of their head. They've got a wide vision, but they have very poor depth perception. They've got a narrow area right directly in front of them where they've got reasonably decent depth perception. They've also got a blind spot directly behind them. And so, ideally, if we're going to approach cattle, we want to do it from a side where they can see us. I always recommend people talk quietly, not screaming and yelling at them as you come up to them. That helps them to kind of detect where you're at, but in a non-threatening way to help get their attention. So because they don't have the best vision, we need to sometimes step back and look at our facilities, look at our buildings, look at where we're asking the cattle to go to. If we've got areas where they don't like going from an area that's well lit into a dark area. They don't like necessarily going from one color of the ground surface to a different color of the ground surface, because with their vision the way it is, they don't know if that color change is an elevation change, a drop off, a step up, or if it's just a color change. And so if you watch cattle, they'll be moving along. They come to something that's a different color on the ground, even if it's the same elevation. They all kind of put their head down and they're going to check it out. At least the first one is going to. And maybe if the next one see the first one keep going, it might not slow them down as much. But those are the kinds of things, if we can eliminate them where we're asking the cattle to go from one place to another, it's going to help flow. And if we can keep them moving in the direction we want, that's a good thing, okay? Shadows are a problem. And if we've got our chute alleyway set up, somebody's going to sit there maybe and be over the chute, and the ones that are supposed to be going by are going to see that. That's going to be a distraction. That's going to stop them. The other area I'd like to see people look hard at is your loading and unloading area of cattle at home. I've been to places where they got it set up pretty nice. They got the trailer floor is probably going to be higher than the ground where they're standing. If we can make some kind of ramp as simple as putting some dirt or lime screening or something in there so that step up is as minimal as possible, that's going to help them keep moving into the trailer where we're going, or unloading off without as high of a risk of injury. So those are some things to keep in mind. They, as far as cattle hearing goes, they have a wider range of hearing than we do, but they're not as well equipped to pick out exactly where that sound is coming from. And so that's some other things to keep in mind. Now it's surprising, some of us, sudden loud noises can startle us too if we're not accustomed to them. You can get accustomed to a lot of things. I lived down by Fort McCoy for 20 years. They have cannons there that they get to shoot once in a while. I don't know why they never would let me go out there and fire one of the cannons. I'm kind of disappointed in that. But the point, I guess, what I'm getting at is when I first moved there, it'd be a beautiful blue sky day and I'm hearing this thunder in the background. I'm looking around for dark clouds. What's going on? Where's the storm coming from? Well, it was just the cannons. After a while, the cannons are going off and I don't go looking around for dark clouds. The idea is cattle will get accustomed to things too. You go into some barns, they've got the rock and roll music cranked up really high. Other barns is quiet. And the cattle in there get accustomed to, but you got to know those things. And when you're dealing with cattle you're not aware of, calm and quiet and slow and easy is the best way to start out. Some farm operations have hydraulic squeeze chutes. If they've got lots of cattle running through there. If you ever been, you guys probably been around hydraulic pumps before. They've got that high pitched line. That not only will that drive the people working the cattle crazy, it really annoys the cattle too. So if we can move those kinds of things far away, or we've got other kinds of noises that are a distraction or hurt to listen to after a while, even around by the cattle, getting rid of it or moving it or putting it in an insulated room so it's toned down can help. Okay. We do want to talk about this fight zone and getting cattle to move. So think about the flight zone as their personal space, okay? You know, you guys all have your own personal space, and somebody you don't know, you're probably only going to let them get so close before you start getting nervous. Hey, what's up with this wrestler? You know, you meet people from other cultures and different countries have different sort of traditional personal spaces. In some countries, they're used to being right up close to each other and loud, and we're not so used to that, and so it can make us nervous. Same with them, and it's going to be built a lot on their past experiences. And so, you know, moving up on them, we can kind of tell. You get so close to a cow, head goes up, looks at you, get a little closer, it starts moving away from you. Okay. It's not the same for all of them, and it may vary with the herd from day to day, depending on what their last experience was. If the neighbor kids stirred them up riding dirt bikes in the pasture nearby or whatever it might be, they might be a little more skittish. So we want to know what that flight zone is, and then we'll use that to our advantage. They've also got the point of balance, and this it's not a perfect circle, okay? This is kind of an oversimplification in the picture. Same with the shoulder being the point of balance, but in general terms, if we move towards the animal in front of the point of the shoulder into that flight zone or their personal space, they're going to back up and move away from us. If we want them to go forward, typically if we're behind the point of shoulder, about where they can see us as they move into there, as you can see in the AB, you step into their flight zone, they start moving away from us, okay? Once we kind of get them headed the direction we want, let them set the pace. It'll be a lot easier and in the long run, faster. You think about this. Are grown-up cows pretty to watch when they run? No, they are not, are they? Horses are pretty to watch when they run. Cows are not, okay? So, and the tricky part is our human beings' natural walking pace is a little bit faster than a cow's natural walking pace. So you might want to remember that. And once we get them headed towards where we want them to go, maybe we need to zigzag back and forth behind them, kind of keep them going in the general direction we want, maybe talking quiet to them. You get one that gets a little nervous and peels off by itself, don't go chasing it. It wants to come back with the rest of them. It'll come back with the rest of them. Unless it's got a calf hid out in the woods somewhere or something like that. Okay. So once we get them lined up in the chute, and I've seen this done many times and maybe been guilty of it a time or two. I am not without fault by long term. Sitting at the back of the line, smacking the one in the back of the line, expecting it become the cat dozer and shove the rest of them forward. Not the most efficient way to get it done, and all you're doing is really annoying that one at the back of the line, right? So if we can go up to the front of the line and then walk back past them where they can see us walking along the chute, as we pass their point of balance, they're typically going to move forward, and if they don't, then we can tap that front one and get the front one moving. Typically when the front one moves, the other ones will also then follow, okay? But sitting there smacking the ones in the back, not the best. If there's no reason for them to be moving, the best thing you can do is actually step away far enough away from the chute where they're not feeling your pressure, so to speak. This past summer, end of August, there was a stockmanship stewardship workshop down at Lancaster, Wisconsin. Anybody here happen to go to it? No hands. If you ever get a chance to see Kurt Pate or Ron Gill in person, watch cattle, and there is actually a virtual online stockmanship stewardship, one of their workshops coming up, I think here in the next week, 10 days. You plug in stockmanship stewardship into Google search, it'll bring it up. You can sign up and watch the online version. They'll do some hands-on. You'll get to watch them work cattle and how they do it and positioning and all that. And those guys are a wealth of knowledge. And it's really fun to watch them do that. The other thing is we typically would have some kind of a paddle stick or a flag stick or a stick as common tools for helping sort and work cattle and move them around. The ones that have the paddle on the end or the flag on the end are way better than just a stick. because you've got something bigger and easier for them to see. And think of those as an extension of your arm. They really aren't supposed to be used as a beating stick. And we've all seen it done. Hopefully we haven't been doing it recently. We've learned better, right? Some of those with the paddle on the end also have BBs in them. And to act like a rattle, make some more noise. I have a tendency, if I have one with BBs in it, to find one that don't, or the ones I have at home, I drill a hole and then get the BBs out. If I want to make noise with it, I'd rather just tap it on something to get their attention. The flag ones are kind of nice because you can wave it and it'll make a little sound. It's not a loud sound, it's kind of a quiet sound. So this whole stockmanship thing, this slow down, calm down, not hoot and holler, not get them running kind of thing. The nice part about it is it doesn't cost you any more money to do things this way than it does to yell and get them excited and run them, but it does pay back, okay? Here's a study that was done in Virginia Tech, 2 different herds, and one herd was, the mama cows are accustomed to low stress handling. They were handled that way all the way through from when the babies were born through weaning. The other herd was the old hoot and holler method. And what they found was that first week at weaning, the low stress calves, after they were weaned off of mama, they gained about 17 pounds. And the ones that were in the hoot and holler method only gained about 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds. We look at over a month, we're looking at 70 pounds versus 50 pounds, 20 pounds extra a calf after that first month, okay? You can see the bottom they're talking about. They put pedometers on them, you know, motion. Those low stress calves, the first 3 days after weaning, you can see 400 to 600 steps an hour. So yeah, it wasn't, you know, there is some stress involved in weaning even in low stress. The control calves, not low stress, they were between 1,000 and 1,600 steps an hour. So they were just, you know, burning off any gain they had because they were stressed out. They weren't by mama, and it was not a good scene. Now, if we think about that, if they were sold 1 month after weaning, and we've got 20 more pounds of calf, right now feeder calves are conservatively $2 a pound, depending on the weight. $3 a pound for the smaller ones. Yeah, they're expensive right now. The lightweights, yeah. And those probably would be. So, if, you know, $2.50 times 20 pounds, that's money. And it didn't cost you anything to get it other than how you handle the animals. So this is from a feedlot, but the same thing would apply in a stocker situation very much so. I think. So they brought in calves. They called them abruptly weaned calves. You guys know what that means? They got weaned on diesel smoke on the way to the sale barn in the trailer, right? Not ideal by a long stretch. So they took these calves and split the group in half. One half, they got them all to the feed yard, put them in a pen, let them settle down, let them get eating. Somebody went in there, walked around amongst them, so they kind of got used to a person and kind of getting moved around calm and slow. They moved them down then through the receiving where they got their vaccination boosters and things like that. The conventional ones was, again, the hoot and holler. Nobody went in and kind of got them used to seeing people. When it was time to take them down to the shoot, they went in there. Now, get going, the whole shooting match. They saw 0.2 pounds a day for the first 100 days on game that they saw. Okay, so that stress lasts a long time. In the end, they had 30 pounds heavier carcasses, and on a carcass basis of $3 a pound. Now you're talking close to $100. No cost other than the behavior and how you're handling the animals. Okay, stocker, we would probably see a very similar kind of thing. If we, you know, you go to a stocker operation, if the guy goes out there and calves all head to the far corner of the pasture when they see them, they're probably more nervous and probably not gaining as well as the ones that, yeah, the person's here, okay, no big deal, okay? There are some goals if you want to look at those. You can look in the BQA webpage, and there are some self-assessment guides, and they've got some, what do we expect? What is our goal for ideal stockmanship? I want to talk a little bit now. One of the big debates, you get the right group in the room, is should we have a bud box or a tub, and they argue back and forth something terrible. I don't care which one you use. They have pros and cons, okay? You figure out what's going to be best for you. But they help, and we got to use them right. As far as now, I'll get into more of the physical materials. So the bud box, typically we can put those together at a lower cost. It's going to be easier to build your own probably. Typically though, we may need a little more square foot of real estate to set one up. Tub, some of the benefits there is it's somewhat less skill dependent. You don't have to have quite the stockmanship skills, but you could still do low stress handling a little bit easier with a tub. In some cases, it may actually be a better option for animals with a small flight zone, okay? If I got a bunch of bottle calves that I bought somewhere and I go out by them, are they gonna wanna move away from me? No, they're all gonna come by me and say, you got anything to eat? In fact, I was in a pen of calves that were raised as bottle calves. At the time, they weighed about 800 pounds, and I was assessing them for muscularity. I think, Ryan, you were there that day. And I'm out there doing fine, and one comes up and starts rubbing his head on my leg, no big deal, and I'm petting him, which was a dumb thing to do because once it's kind of like a dog. Once you start petting the dog, you don't want to quit. Well, I quit petting him. Well, that was offensive to him. So he actually reached up and bit hold of my forearm and shook his head up and down. Bad part is I don't have no cartilage in my right shoulder anymore, so that really hurt. But if you got animals that don't have a flight zone, sometimes having that physical barrier on that gate to swing around and get them to go through can be beneficial, okay? And depending on who you ask, there may be some less walking with the tub. Here's the important part though. I think neither one of them were originally intended to be a holding area. This is where we see people sort of not get the most out of them that they could. Okay. The whole idea with them was you have your single file, or if you want a double barrel alley, that's fine. But the idea is you bring in enough animals at one time just to fill up that alley leading up to your chute or the compartment in the trailer. Okay. So we bring them in, we think about them as a clover leaf on the interstate or a roundabout. All we want to do is kind of bring them in there and use it to redirect and load up that single file alley. The only place we really want them standing around is back in the bigger holding area where there's not much stress, or for a short time in that single file or double alleyway. Rest of the time, it should more be a moving around thing. I think, well, Ryan, my co-conspirator back there, we were at a farm where they were running a bunch of cattle and they had a tub, and their goal was they'd shove as many in that stupid tub as it would hold. And they were pushing pretty hard to get it to latch. Well, then the one that was by the alleyway had his butt to the alleyway instead of, now they can't move. That's not the idea. The idea is you bring them in, get them in, line up, fill the tub, or not the tub, fill the alleyway, and work those out. And then meanwhile, somebody's getting ready to reload it again as it gets empty, okay? It's also important that you have some escape gates and options in your holding areas for you to be able to get in and out of there easy from when you're out by the chute, and also get out of there if somebody all of a sudden develops a serious attitude. So here's kind of an example of what a bud box looks like, and some general guidelines, and there's some flexibility here, but general guidelines. If you're doing this mostly on foot, 12 foot's about the right width. And if we're only running, 3 to 4, maybe 5 at the most, adult bovines through there at a time, 20 feet deep is probably about right. If we're going to use it to load trailer compartments where the compartments might hold more head than that, we might need it bigger. Yes. Yep. But we don't want them so uncomfortable they try to climb over the other end. But you're right. We don't want them losing movement when they go in there. We want to go in, we want to close the gate, we want to go back towards them, so they want to go around us. Here's kind of my walk through steps with them if you haven't seen this before. So as you can see on the right side, the blue dots are people, okay? So we got the right side, somebody's doing the work with the chute work with them. And there's right now, there's 2 in there, 1 in the chute, 1 waiting to be next. And our other person is bringing 4 into the bud box. And so now they've just went and closed the gate and opened the little gate into the alley. And they're gonna start moving back towards the cattle, and they're gonna come around. And they think they're getting away from this guy, and that's why they go down into that alleyway, okay? And once they're in there, then you can close the gate. And you may want to have a crowd gate in there, in case you got one that needs a little extra persuasion. But I would say if you're using the crowd gate of every single group, you're basically got a tub without all the benefits of the other parts of it, okay? Now here's an example of one layout for a tub. The bottom is kind of our big holding area, the tub up at the right end. And then you bring in your cut, your 4 or 5 or whatever goes into the single file at a time. Okay. So here's, and if you're good with your layout, you can fit either a bud box or a tub in a old dairy barn if you want to use that for handling facilities. But don't get trapped in the idea of I got the existing shed, I have to put it in there. There might be a better place to put it than in there. Sometimes some of our old buildings, the best thing we can do is sort of, it's served its useful life and we're not gonna do a lot with it anymore, okay? And with tubs, we can get different percentage of a circle. But again, you want it big enough to make it decent for the amount of head that you have, so you have reasonable flow and you guys aren't wearing yourselves out with running them through. And then comes the big discussion. Do we want a straight single file alley or do we want a curved single file alley coming out of either the bud box or the tub? And it don't really matter, okay? Some of the reason for the curve was, Otto says I better get moving. 10 minutes. I still better find another gear and go. So if you are going to have a curve, have it start at least 15 feet past where they walk into there. If it's closer than that, they think it's a dead end and they're reluctant to go in. You want them to be able to see that they think they can get away, all right? Adjustable alleys are very beneficial, especially when you're working with a wide range of cattle sizes. And I've seen farms where backstops, they either have to walk under. There have been too many of them where they've been in the wrong stupid place. One place I was at, they were too close to the chute. So you know, sometimes the one cow goes in and the next one gets her head caught in the back door when you close it. And now the veterinarian's got her breathing down his neck if he's doing any palpation or anything like that, or you're trying to get accurate weights. And there was no way, with the way that backstop was located, that we were going to get anybody to back up because they were shoved in there and wasn't going to happen. Cut gates are another way. On your alleyways, you want to be able to swing the side open because it's not a matter of if somebody might fall down in there someday. It's probably more a matter of when. If we can open up that swinging side gate on one side or the other, it's going to be easier for them to get up and get out, and easier for you to get them up and out. Okay, here's some examples. I don't care which brand you buy, find a good dealer and work with them. Gates, I think, and hinges are important. Gates are involved in a high percentage of injuries in working cattle, okay? Latch didn't work good. The worst thing is you got a gate, you got to pick the end up and drag around. You want the gates to swing and not have to fight them. So if they're in the wrong place, they're not doing what you're doing, or their hinges are damaged and their latches don't work, spend some time to maintain them or get them out of there, okay? Some of these, if we can put rubber bumpers in and things to cut down on noise, that's going to be beneficial. I'd also consider if you've got a reasonable number of animals, and you're going to have to decide what reasonable is, but consider getting scales somewhere in there. You can manage better what you can measure. We had a field day down by Ridgeland a couple of winters ago, and the owner there, we talked about this. He said, yes, he said, we paid for our scale in a short amount of time alone on more accurately determining the dose of the pharmaceutical products, wormer, vaccines, antibiotics, whatever it is, you know, not so much vaccines, but the other treatments, by having a better um, indicator of what they weighed. So I think, again, evaluate your guys' stockmanship. Put people where they best work. Some of them, it might be on the tractor out in the back doing maintenance when you're working cattle. And that's okay because that's an important job that needs to be done too. And the other thing is walk through your current facilities. This is kind of a neat use for your phone or tablet. Put your phone or tablet at cow eye height, turn it on and record it and walk through there. Because what we see up here is not what they see down there. Is there funny shadows and things like that that you can do something about with a light bulb or whatever. Bad corners, you know, if we're working them through there, 90-degree corners can be very troublesome. Less than 90-degree corners should be eliminated. But sometimes they get into that 90, you know what they try to do. Sometimes they try to go up over the top, even when we're not getting crazy with them. So if we can put something across there and it helps kind of turn them instead of going right into the corner, that can help with cattle flow too. Again, how you behave and your people influences how your cattle behave. The facilities that we're talking about don't have to be fancy or expensive, but they got to be functional and efficient. Okay. And that's all I got for you. Any questions? Well, you guys have been a wonderful audience. Oh, yep. Right. Yep. No, you're exactly right. And that's all that flow and where you put them. Kevin. Yeah, there is. That's a good question. Um, Sometimes, and I hope it's very infrequent, but sometimes a tickle from a hot shot is more humane than the other options to get something really stubborn to move. But it should be a last option. And if you have one, it should be not there where everybody, especially the tractor driver, can find it. You guys all know what I'm saying. But sometimes it is a better option than a beaten stick or something else to get somebody that's really got their mind made up. They're not going somewhere to move. But they should be very minimal. Okay. And yep. No, that's good. You definitely got the low stress thing figured out from a stockmanship aspect, sounds like to me. And you have what you need for what you do.
I saw somewhere that Temple Grandin is going to be in the area. Do you know anything about that? Okay, well, she's retired, but Colorado State, but she's the one responsible for a lot of this innovations in cattle handling. And she's still apparently out there. She's autistic, so she understands what cattle think and do. So thank you, Bill. We really appreciate it. We have a 20-minute break now, so enjoy yourselves. Let's get ready. We have a panel discussion. Okay. Farmer Health Panel, Lynn Johnson, Sherry Lewis, John Peterson, and Tiffany Peterson. Okay. Lynn's going to run it.
Thank you. Thank you, Otto. We're going to have a panel discussion here on raising sort of a topic you might not have expected to be on our program. But if you recall from last conference, we had a young lady, Bridget Olson, who shared her experiences and her message about farmer mental health. It ended up being the most sought after in terms of follow-up and questions, and it was the most popular session we had at our last conference. That was a signal to me and to others that this kind of a subject matter area is desired and want a further discussion on. So that's the motivation and justification for our choosing to have a panel today on grazer or human health issues. And I have to share a personal story myself. But before I get into that, I want to remind this group that there is a 3-ring binder available on handling facilities. If you were interested in developing a handling facility, carry over from Bill's talk, I have that available and it can be checked out and shared. I just have to keep track of where it is. So, my story is that I had a heart attack last December, had open heart surgery, and was in a rehab recovery phase for about 3-4 months. And it gave my wake up call, if you will. And so I've been exposed to the general recommendations for how we can improve our health, both in terms of food we eat, our diet, or our exercise, staying active. Now, as grazers, we're pretty active people, and we are, but it's more than that in terms of our need to keep high octane, if you will, activity level. So our heart and respiratory systems stay stressed, if you will, or actively used enough to maintain a high level of health. So what I'm going to do on my part is to share with you kind of the standard set of recommendations that I received when I was in my rehab program, and that should form the foundation to all of our considerations of our health care that we are responsible for, which is to stay healthy. And our panel members are going to take it beyond that and add their own expertise and insight and share with you sort of the advanced areas that are available and insights that'll help you make your own personal decisions about how you manage your own health. So in my case, when you are a patient with a heart attack and open heart surgery, you have to recover from that shock to your physical um, stress, I guess you'd say, of the operation. And you don't realize it until you've been through it, just how far you have to go. When you don't move for a couple of weeks, your body seems to forget. And so your recovery is really getting back to normal. And that was my goal, of course, and that's what the healthcare system is trying to help you with. So I was in a rehab program where I attended basically physical education for 3 days a week for an hour and a half. And then I was encouraged to exercise when I wasn't in class. And that gave me a set of goals that I could accomplish. And the basic goal I had was to get back to farming. And so to do that, um, I was one of those, I guess, problem patients in that I was a high achiever relative to my peers in those classes. They had a goal for the physical and respiratory uh, uh, trainers or people that were guiding the program that most patients were supposed to make a 40% improvement in their physical output. And that wasn't adequate for me. I had to do better than that. So I was motivated, and some of them were not. So that's a first distinction. So if you love what you do, you'll probably work harder than most to get back to where you want to be. But what I have to share with you is just the kind of things that were recommended for the recovery process, but they also function as a maintenance program. So I'm going to keep these copies up here, but I'm going to send some around. One is a little program that you can keep track of your diet. So if you just take these and pass it around for everybody to take a look at, and if you want to get a copy, I have several up here. That involves um, a physical program involving stretching and warm-ups, you'd call it. Just pass that around. And the other item here is a strength training, which gets your respiratory and physical conditioning improved, and you stay in good physical condition. And then the other item that's in your folders is a rate your plate type function. If you can see that in your folder, that gives you a guideline for how you might manage your diet. And these are kind of the standard recommendations of the health professionals that are involved with nutrition and heart and respiratory health. So you can rate yourself and give yourself an idea of what is beneficial and what isn't, and that will allow you to make maybe better dietary decisions on a general way or in a general concept of what the health professionals recommend. And we'll integrate that into probably some questions and answers here later on. But I want to give most of the time today to our panel members who have got experience and recommendations. I just want to emphasize that we in the field of direct marketing are grass-fed or home-raised food, meat, and other food that we market, we're in a very strong position to influence the consuming public and our customers on what is a improved and high quality diet. And that is obviously the foundation to a good health program. So you all, by being here and a part of our community of Graziers, are in a real strong position. But I can say that even though that was my lifestyle and my approach, I still had a heart attack, and I still have to work at maintaining my health at a high level. And most of that has to do with the extent of my physical exercise and the discipline I have to apply to my diet. And I think when you get to be my age, I'll be 80 years old in a couple months, you've got to really work at it, because the world is full of people of a similar age that aren't. And I got to see a lot of those folks in my rehab program. And it's not a good sight, quite frankly. They don't seem to have a good attitude and don't have good practices or habits that are going to sustain them for a long time. So that's my perspective, and I wanted to share that with you. We're now going to ask the experts what their recommendations are, and we're going to start with Sherry Lewis, who Dale recommended as a person who has some good messages to share, and that's all I've asked our panel members to do, is share the messages that they have and use their perspective to improve our health. Sherry?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So I got involved in natural health about 13 years ago. My health was not going in a good direction. And unfortunately, I was one of those people who had fallen through the cracks in the medical system. And I was not ready to give up. So I started looking at natural health. And I found that through natural health, I was able to not only improve my health, but the health of my family as well. So, because of this, I decided to go back to school, get trained, and become certified in a technique called nutrition response testing. And over the years, what I have found is that when I have worked with my clients, that there are a number of things that cause people to tend to fall through the cracks. And so some of those things I have listed on the handout that you have. And there are a few books that I have on here, but there's two more you might want to add. And one is called Mold Warrior, and the other one is called Dirty Electricity. And so the books that are on here they're probably some of the best books that I have found over the years that offer people things at their fingertips that they can do to help improve their health when they don't have somebody else around who's able to give them the help that they need at the time. So Jeff spoke this morning about water, and so I would also like to continue a little bit more on that, because there are over 80,000 known toxins in our environment, but what about all the unknown toxins? So we have we may think that the water that we're drinking from the city might be clean because it goes through multiple filtration systems. However, there are plenty of tests that show that it's not always clean, and that really depends on what city or town that you're in. There is a website, and I did put the website on here. It's Environmental Working Group, or EGW. No, well, whatever. It's on here. But anyway, you can type in your zip code in there, and it will tell you what kind of toxins may or may not be in your water and where it lands on there. So there's a place for you to be able to go and check. But there are also other things that you can do for your water. We can look at all kinds of water filtration systems. Um, Carbon is probably one of the number ones that people come to me with. RO is another one, and distillation. Those are probably the top three. And what I have found is that carbon filters can be really good, so can RO. But the problem is, how often is it being used? And because all of them are going to lose their reduction in quality the more it's being used. So if we are not changing it frequently enough, we're not necessarily going to be getting the same quality at the beginning as we do at the end. The third one is distillation. And that happens to be one of my favorites because I have seen much better progress with that. The main reason is, well, let me back up for 1 second. All of these other water systems, they're all telling us that they're taking out basically 99.9% of the toxins. But what they're not telling us is, are they testing all 80,000 plus toxins that are known out there? They're not. They're just telling us of the ones that they're testing. So the difference with that between water distillation is that it turns the water into a vapor, and what is left behind are all the heavy toxins. The only thing that is going up in the water vapor, the only thing known, at least that in the studies that I have read, is a plastic particle. So if the plastic particle is small enough, that will go up in the water vapor and that can be carried over, but everything else is going to be left behind. So to get out that plastic particle, what you can do is use a carbon filter. And again, you have to replace that over time. But still, that's going to take out more of the toxins than any of the others. One of the concerns with a water distiller is that it's taking out the minerals. So that is really an easy remedy because we can just simply add those back in, which we should be doing anyway, because a lot of the minerals that we're finding in our water are not easily absorbed into our body because they're not in the right form. They have to be transferred through, gardening and converted into what our body needs for our body to be able to absorb it. That's why oftentimes you'll see like water spots on your dishes in the dishwasher or on your car. And actually in the north, we have harder water than they do in the south. And we also have higher incidence of hardening of the arteries in the north than they do in the south. So we can see how it affects our body as well. So water is a very important part of our life. We can't live for more than a few days without it. So having the cleanest water we can have is really very important. Whether we're in the city or whether we have well water. So there are plenty of things we can find in our well water that are also toxic that we don't want in our bodies. And so getting that filtered out is really good. And if we can get our water tested, but tested for the things that might be more common in the area that we live to make sure that that is covered so we know we have a good clean source. So that is one of the things that I see that can make a big difference with my clients. The other one is probably just as important as that one, I would say would be mold. Mold is growing by leaps and bounds. I am seeing it more and more in people. And a lot of times with mold, people can be misdiagnosed because of the symptoms that mold causes. So things like fibromyalgia, dementia, Parkinson's, MS, these are just some of the things that I have seen people turn around in their lives, lose those diagnoses because they treated the mold in their body. And so it really is very, very prolific. It can really affect us in big ways. And so some of the symptoms that we see with mold can be brain fog, stiffness of joints. There is also, here we go, brain fog. So I was just in the bathroom actually, and I saw that along the ceiling, some of you could see where the sheetrock had been put together with the mud and tape and stuff. These are things that we should be looking for. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that there might be mold in there, but this is the start of it. And mold is not just what we see where it's growing on the sides of the walls and looking black. If you can smell mold, there's mold there, but you're smelling the most dangerous part of the mold. It's the mycotoxins and the mycoplasmas that become airborne. And when they're airborne, we're breathing them in. They get into our lungs. Our skin is our largest organ. It actually absorbs whatever goes on, comes in contact within our skin and within 23 to 26 seconds. So not only are we breathing it in, when it's in our environment, our body is taking it in more than one way. And this can affect our organs and how we think, how we feel. It can affect our sleep. There are so many ways that people are affected by it. One of the highest places for mold is actually in our schools, whether they're private or public. Schools have had huge issues with mold. And whenever you get into a larger place like that where it's not just like taking care of your own home, it's much harder to get people to notice it and take care of it. So some of the things that you can do when it is in your own home is remediation is of course always really important, but there are also some other things that we can do. Um, First of all, one of the myths is that bleach kills mold. Bleach does not kill mold. Borax kills mold, peroxide kills mold, and vinegar kills mold. And they're much safer as well. So, but at the same time, 5 minutes? At the same time, we do not want to be exposing ourselves by getting too close to the mold. So another thing that we can do is using an ozone machine. An ozone machine is going to take all the oxygen out of the air and killing everything in that is in that room. So you also want to make sure that your pets are out of there and that nobody is in there. And you want to run it for usually about 3 hours, and then you want to give it a good rest time for as long as you possibly can, but no less than also 3 hours for that ozone to kind of come down so that you're not breathing it in because it can harm you even after it's shut off. But those are some ways that you can actually help with getting rid of some of the mold in your house and making it safer. So the 2 books that I put on here, The Mold Warrior is a great book that really talks about all the different effects of mold. And then also Breaking the Mold by Dr. Krista. She's actually in southern Minnesota. She has on her website a mold test. So you can actually do the questionnaire on there and see if mold is something that you have been exposed to. It does stay in our body. So if you have lived in a moldy place in the past, but you don't now, if you haven't done anything to get rid of mold, it's still going to be in your body. And so if you are having some health issues that you're not getting any answers to, it might be mold that's causing the issue. So there's so anyway, so those are 2 of the things, 2 of probably the biggest things that I see that people are dealing with when it comes to health issues that are preventing them from really being diagnosed properly with well, the water's not necessarily one, but it definitely does make a big difference in how well we are able to respond to things. And then the mold does definitely make a big difference when we can clear that out of our homes and clean up that out of our lives. And then one more thing that also makes a big difference is emotions. We don't think about emotions, but if you think about how much tension you get in your shoulders when you're when you're under stress, that's going on in our body too. So working on letting go of emotions or being aware of what might be holding you back is also important as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We have challenges with time management. Obviously, I probably said too much in the beginning. So the next 2 speakers our pharmacists. And John and Tiffany have pharmacy in Siren and have been very helpful to the community. And they're going to just share some of their ideas and recommendations that they have that they've been sharing with Graziers over the last several years.
Thanks, Lynn. Thank you, Sherry. So, first, just I would comment on a couple of things that she said. Water is definitely important. One thing to keep in mind that all the drugs that we take, they don't disappear. They get modified in the liver. We pee, sweat, poop them out, and then they end up in our environment. So this would be one huge reason to take care of yourself so you don't have to take medicine. And chemos are a major problem. So anybody getting chemo is, this is ending up in our environment, okay? There's a lot of, you can research from the sites what drugs are being found in the water systems, and these are in wells too. So nicotine, propranolol, which is a blood pressure, are some of the ones, most common ones, and these are drugs that were brought to market many, many years ago. So it takes a while, but they are reaching there. So if we can see what we're taking today, we might see them in our wells in 40, 50, 60 years. So we're not the typical pharmacy. We do dispense drugs, but we view drugs as a crutch. So if you sprain your ankle, you buy a set of crutches, you wear them for a while, you realize your lifestyle hasn't been the best, you need to make some changes, you make those changes, and then you try to get off of those meds. There are, of course, meds that some people will never get off of. And then there's going to be meds that things like antidepressants and stuff. Some people will never be able to get off of. Although I do believe there's many things that you can do without taking those types of meds. So there was one other thing you mentioned I wanted to comment on. There was something about being the healthcare system in general, in my opinion, it wasn't great to begin with, but then COVID hit, and then I think it just really went in the toilet. Since then, it's recovered some, but in general, prior to COVID, you had to be your own advocate, and today it is even worse. So if you're not fighting for yourself, you're going to get lost in the system, okay? And especially if you've got cancer or something like that, where there's time is very critical. I mean, we see customers that are being diagnosed today, and then they're not seen for 1 or 2 months out, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that person should be bumped in front of anybody else that's in the system. So, so then I guess we'll just now talk about our spiels that we usually talk about. There's things that I wish everybody knew and understood. And that is your sickness is very profitable. And we've made a lot of money on people that have been sick over the 10 years that we've had this pharmacy. But the businesses and the companies above us are making way more money. And we have to understand that, one, sickness is profitable. And sometimes these companies, they don't want you to heal. They don't want you to, they want a monthly customer. And if you look at all the drugs on my shelf, only a handful cure, the rest maintain and treat symptoms. And this is where I think we stand out, is we will dispense or get you your med that will take care of the symptoms, but then we're going to offer you how to get to the solution, the main problem that's going on. And it's sad, but most people they don't want to hear it. Some people, they don't care to hear anything. They just want to grab their med and head out the door. Some people will listen, but a small portion will actually make the change. And we see it a lot. And it's absolutely shocking to see people come in 6 months later. We don't even recognize them half the time. They've lost weight or, whatever, their skin changes. It's just amazing. So, uh, big pharma, big medicine, and I think big ag falls into this category too. They want a monthly customer or a yearly customer. But if we go to the source, we fix our soil, we might not need all the fertilizers and the chemicals and stuff like that. But then I do think that there's a portion of society, businesses that have no problem making us sick and knowing that someone else will profit from it. And this is the food industry and the big pharma industry. I like to say this a lot. I don't have any proof of this, but I think big ag, big medicine, big pharma, and big food, they are all sitting in a room somewhere smoking their cigars and swiggling down whiskeys, laughing at us and viewing us as their cattle. Okay. And I really do think that. And if you look at the food industries, the poisons that they're putting in the foods, it's just feeding the medical side and then feeding the pharmacy side. So that would be something to really think about and start, looking for on the internet and stuff like that. You'll find a lot of good stuff. We used to say our biggest focus was sugars, too many carbs in our diet. And while that is definitely a problem, we've shifted over the past year and a half or so to the oils, the polyunsaturated fats, and a nickname for that is PUFAs. These things they're the corn oils, the seed oils, sunflower, safflower, anything seed or vegetable. These things are not natural. They're practically drugs or chemicals now. I think if you walked into a soy field and grabbed a bunch of soybeans and smashed them up and, I don't know, pressed them or did something to them and got your little bit of oil out, if you took it, it probably is harmless to our body. Or neutral, not necessarily damaging. But what they do to it is absolutely insane, how much chemical processes. And same thing with the fake meat stuff. All you have to do is just watch a few videos or read on how they actually make the fake meat. And your mind will be blown at how many chemicals and stuff are added and removed. And these things are just not natural anymore. So, and then you really got to think about it. If you, one of my things I like to say is, if you look at how long humans have been on Earth, it would be this much. Today, it's like a sliver. The food that we're eating is so the changes in the food that we are eating have been made in just a flick of a moment when you compare and look at all of humanity and how long we've been walking around Earth, and our bodies just have not adapted to that. So we need to get back to eating more natural foods. And this is where farmers, we are right there. If we just eat the animals that we're raising, we would be a heck of a lot healthier. So, there was a couple things Lynn said. One of the things so we're pharmacists, we stand in one spot. I've worked hospital where I did get to walk and I would take the stairs and stuff like that. But I've always said to farmers that come into the pharmacy that you guys have the best job, because you don't have to go to a gym to get your exercise. You have plenty of opportunities in your fields. Instead of throwing bags of feed or something on a four-wheeler, carry them to the place wherever they're going to get exercise. Stretching is important. And probably the most important way to look at exercise, and these are studies that were done in diabetics, high intensity, short duration is more important than like spending an hour on a bicycle or going to a gym and doing some form of exercise. Just the studies did 8 to 10 second intervals 10 times, and that is it. So you're really exerting yourself for less than a couple of minutes a day. And in between those intervals, you take all the time you need to catch your breath. So this would be picking up the sack of whatever grain, walking as quickly as you can to wherever you're going to drop it off at, and then just stroll back to wherever to get the next bag. And if it takes 2 minutes and you have to sit down, that's totally fine. It's the high intensity is what's important. And you're pushing yourself closer to that edge. And when we get close to that edge, then stress is added to our body, but this stress is good stress. Okay. And then what happens is then our body improves. If we never stress, and let's just say you get on a bicycle and pedal for an hour, there is some stress, but not enough stress to make a lot of change in the body. So there was a couple of you didn't get to some vitamins, which maybe I'll comment on them. So the most important thing I think you can do today is avoid all seed oils. We need to eat, fry our eggs in butter or tallow. Okay. Lard is good too, but it all depends on what you're feeding that animal. So if you're feeding that animal grains, corn, and soy, they're high in polyunsaturated fats. So then that animal is going to incorporate that into its fat, and then now you're going to eat it. So you might as well have just eaten the soy yourself. So we just butchered our hogs and our personal hogs, and what I've noticed over the years is our hog meat is becoming more like tallow. It's almost waxy, and we will what we do with a lot of the products that don't get used, the bones and scrap meat and stuff, we'll cook that down for 2 days, throw some rice in it, and then we feed that to our egg layers. But like this year when we did it, the fat that I cooked it down, but I threw it in and let it sit for a day or 12 hours or whatever, and then threw it in the fridge because I couldn't get to it to finish it. And it was almost the whole thing at room temperature almost was solid. And that's what you want. When you see a fat that's solid at room temperature, that is a saturated fat. Polyunsaturated fats, most of them are liquid. So if if you're going to start paying attention to this, if you have one of your animals, and the same thing happens with our chickens over the years, we've gone to, when we, make a broth or something like that, I noticed that there is a much thicker solid fat layer on that, and that's saturated fats. So it's a much healthier fat. And so the one vitamin that she has here is very important. Well, there's a couple. We used to recommend fish oil a lot, but that actually is a polyunsaturated fat itself. And the reason the studies show benefit in reduction and inflammation and stuff, it's because so if you look at the range of fats, these are the crappy fats and these are the super healthy fats. This would be tallow over here, and this would be like corn oil or something over here. Fish oil is in the middle. Most of us are eating in this area right here. So by adding something a little bit better, you're gonna see better health. And so I've saw it in myself. I used to take fish oil, and it would reduce a lot of the aches and pains that I would have. But we stopped taking fish oil, and now I don't have pain. But over the years we've incorporated more and more animal fats into our diet. So But one of the benefits of animal fat is that's where one of the places we get vitamin K. And so there's two vitamin Ks. There's a K1, and that's the clotting vitamin. So if you mention vitamin K to your doctor, he's going to light his hair on fire thinking you're trying to cause a stroke or a heart attack. But K2 is what drives and directs calcium from tissues into bone and teeth. And so if we were to test, most of us would be deficient um, in it because we don't eat enough fermented foods, another source for K2. Egg yolks, we don't eat enough eggs. And of course, we don't get enough animal fat. But the nice thing is you can buy K2 as a vitamin. And out of all the things that big pharma and the medical industry tells us to do to avoid strokes and heart attacks, nothing has shown more beneficial than increasing our vitamin K2. And so 100 micrograms in the original studies reduced strokes and heart attacks by like 70%. And so you want to take a higher level than that. I mean, we sell it as 180 micrograms, and it's it, I don't know if it's enough to make a difference, but I think if if um if I had to guess, if you're eating raw milk and cheese and then getting animal fats and then getting a little bit of fermented foods, most likely you would have enough. The problem is that most people are not eating like that. Um, and we do eat like that, and I still supplement with vitamin K2. So, and we eat sauerkraut every single day. We have it on our eggs every single day, and I eat like 5 eggs, and sometimes it'll be 8 eggs, and I'll eat like 3 yolks, and the rest are the full eggs. Um, so anyway, so that's that. Vitamin D is highly important, and the vitamin D, for like in Lynn's case, we would highly recommend the K2 and D3. D will help the blood vessel become more flexible. And the reason that we're having trouble, and I think you touched on it, but with the minerals is we're depositing, our body doesn't know what to do with the calcium. So it's depositing it in the tissues. And there's a test, it's called the coronary calcium score. It is probably the most accurate score or sensitive score to tell you how close to a heart attack or stroke you're going to have. And that is actually measuring the calcium in your blood vessels. So why don't we just try to remove that instead of taking a statin or something like that? So there is some benefits to statin, but the K2 and reducing sugars and also modifying your your diet, and I'll let Tiff talk maybe about that. Those would be more important than taking a statin in my mind. Now, I'm not recommending those on statins to just quit taking them. There are people, we have customers that we work with, and their uncle, their father, their brothers have all died at 40, and their cholesterol is just through the roof. Their triglycerides are through the roof. That's the person that the statins were designed for, but they should also be doing the K2. They also should be reducing 5 minutes, carbs and stuff. Did I take up Tiff's time too, or I did? Okay. Yes. Oh. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the best way to cook meat in general is like in a crock pot, a soup or a stew. Um, high temps, with, you know, even without barbecue sauces and stuff like that, you're getting this glycolation, which is like, it's basically, the protein and sugars are welding together. And that's one of the things that if you were to look inside the body, some of the problem is that these things are sticky and our body doesn't know what to do with them. And so when we put food or chemicals in that our body doesn't know what to do with, it that stores it. And that's the when you hear about plaques in the brain and plaques in the arteries, these are storage deposits of garbage that our body doesn't really know what to do with. So yes, I mean, we love smoking. We smoke a lot of meat, but we probably crock pot and make stews and soups with our meat. Probably 60% of our meals are that way.
I think maybe you were trying to ask like, what would be a proper how to cook it in order to get better vitamins or minerals or what the body's looking for. So sure. So on that basis that you guys are producers, so one of the things that we constantly are talking about is to eat real food and real meat. And one of the things that I'm constantly noticing is many people don't know what real meat or how to cook those real meat products. So if when you're educating your clientels, maybe offer some recipes or some ideas of how to utilize your products in a cooking manner to increase that nutrient content. So with the oxtail, people are utilizing that because they're trying to eat nose to tail to increase their certain vitamins or gelatins or collagens to increase health, beauty related things. So these are kind of basic concepts that I think that some of you direct to consumers need to understand or need to get educated in to be able to have the conversations, to be able to ascertain why your meat is better than someone else's meat products. And that's a lot of the things that we do at the pharmacy in relation to why there's this large demand for now bones and bone broth, and why is that important, and do you have it, and can you get it? And people are concerned about what is in the commercial meats, commercial products, and going towards more what you guys are selling, your rotationally grazed meats, and the different nutrient contents in there. There's some great articles online, and I can get some references. I wasn't quite prepared. I didn't know how in detail this session was going to go. But there are some content out there about high polyphenols and carotenoids and these plant chemicals that are anti-inflammatory, also antioxidants, and where your meat will outshine other conventional meats. So that might have some nice references on board to be able to have those conversations on why you guys are also demanding a higher price point for your products as well. And I guess that's where if you guys had specific questions on that, and that's where I thought that this maybe conversation could go with John and I, because we got into the farming realm because we wanted to provide that to our own family. And we are two non-farmers, pharmacists that are now trying to get into the farming community because we understand that you're right, food is medicine. And it is a much better medicine, and it's been around a lot longer than the medications that we are being provided with today. So I guess I'll leave that right there for the moment and ask if there's any specific questions that you guys have that maybe we can offer. Miss Levon? Yes. Yes. It's the acid of the vinegar that's drawing it out. So it's helped breaking down the bone products to release the minerals in the bones into your bone broth. So I have done a lot of bone broths in my time, and I do add vinegar and apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is a great topic too. It's not just for your gut health. And that was a topic I just jotted down to compare gut health to soil health, and how as a people, it seems like our gut health are declining as we get away from good soil health. So I'm able to relate soil health to gut health to health as a people. And I see that, and I'm trying to get that approach to some of our clients to understand that what we're eating really does matter. So yes, vinegar can, I guess, break down bones easier to get the mineral concentrations up in your bone broths. Mhm. Is there any other? Yes. Sure, absolutely. So on the realm of oils and fats, so I do understand this is a little different than what's the conventional medicine side of things or approach to things. It seems as though there's two camps. One is more of a naturopathic side. One is more towards conventional medicine. We are both conventionally trained who had their eyes open to naturopathic means. So I understand that this might be controversial in several of the eyes, but on that realm with the fats, um, typically saturated fats are going to be from animal sources. The olive oils are more towards neutral, whereas your saturated fats are less inflammatory. So olive oil is a neutral fat along with your avocado oil. And then your polyunsaturated fats are more the inflammatory problem causing fats. Wow, lots of hands. Yeah. Well, that's the problem with the olive oil. Absolutely. I'm sorry. I forgot I was supposed to do that. I apologize. So the question first was, where on the realm is olive oil based as far as a problem fat or problem oil? And the second follow-up question was, is that also the case when it's heated? And what makes the olive oil a better quality fat than more of your polyunsaturated seed oils is that it has a high polyphenol content that helps the oil from being oxidized. So it basically acts as its own antioxidant. So when you heat it, you destroy that. So if you're going to use an olive oil, typically you want to use the best quality olive oil that you're able to budget in, single source. And those things are helping you get a good quality olive oil with the high polyphenols. The more you open that bottle, the more oxygen gets in it, and you're oxidizing the oil, causing more towards inflammatory processes.
Cook with the tallow or stuff like that.
Saturated fats. Yeah.
It's good for making mayonnaise and olive oil.
Challenged by our schedule here, so there's going to be a lot more questions along this line. I think we should sort of group together at lunch today and continue this discussion, but our time is running out, and I want to thank the panel for all their input and ideas. And let's just continue this discussion over lunch. Thank you. We're going to introduce our speakers and I'm sorry, our exhibitors. And I think we're going to try to do this by just walking out in the hall and walking through the exhibits. I think bringing them in here is just going to take too much time. We've got about 10, 15 minutes here to get through our exhibitors. So please get up from your desks, and we're going to walk around the building and talk to our exhibitors and introduce them. And Mike Miles has got the mic, and I'm going to go up there and we're going to take a tour. So come along and you'll be able to be introduced to our exhibit.